I'm asking participants, please, to use the raised hand function, which you'll see hopefully at the top of your screen as a hand. And if you press your participants, that's the one with people button, you will see whether your hand is raised or not. I would also urge you that if you have spoken, please remember to take down your hand. I can do it myself anyway, but it would be better if you did it so I didn't have to keep looking at that. If you use the raise hand function with your device, could you please use the chat function? Again, that is next between the participants button and the hand raise function, just to say you'd like to ask a question, and we will be able to see that happens. And please just refrain from general chit chat on that chat function. Just have it to do with discussions, because the discussions would not be minuted, and I'd like our discussions to be minuted. But anything in the chat function is subject to an FOI request if somebody asks for it. So during the meeting, please, would you please mute your microphones and turn off your cameras unless you are speaking. I will keep my camera, and I won't mute myself at all throughout the meeting. Could you make sure that you speak directly into the camera during the meeting so that we can hear you properly? Obviously, I will interrupt if I'm having some problems with you. In line with our guidance on the use of social media, I'm happy for anybody attending today's meeting, including members of the council, to use social media, providing it doesn't disturb the business of the meeting. So that's all the formalities prior to the meeting. And before the actual meeting starts, and Nick, you still have your camera on, and I've asked for cameras to be taken off unless you're speaking. Thank you, Nick. Thank you. That's great. So first of all, what I would like to do is to welcome Rachel Wardell to the meeting, the new Director of Children's Services, and this is the start of week 2 with us. So Rachel, I would like to just ask you to say a few words to the committee before the meeting starts, and I know that you will be observing the meeting throughout, and I know, as we've had a brief conversation last week, we will, I'm sure that you'll be interested to get to know the members and listen to the scrutiny of this meeting. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that introduction. I'm Rachel Wardell. I'm the new Executive Director for Children, Families and Lifelong Learning. As Councillor Hammond has said, I joined on Monday the 7th of December, so this is the beginning of week 2. I've previously spent 2.5 years at the London Borough of Merton as their Director of Children, Schools and Families, and prior to that 5 years in West Berkshire Council as what was called there the Director of Communities, which was a twin hat role as the Director for Children's Services and the Director of Adult Social Care. So as you can expect with that history, very aware of the issues in front of members today, because in many cases they're shared by a number of local authorities. I'll be observing today with interest, and I look forward to participating in sort of more completely in future select committees, and really looking forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So if we turn now to the body of the agenda, first of all, we have apologies for absence and substitutions. We have apologies from Andrew Povey, and we have a substitute in Councillor Claire Curran. Claire, welcome to our meeting today, and I know because of your expertise, you'll be a really good participating member. I really do value your comments that are going to be coming forward. Thank you. I also have apologies from Simon Parr. He has some other work commitments that he's unable to attend, and also Yvonne Lay, who late last night contacted me, who has a some personal issues she has to deal with today and sends her apologies too. So now can I please complete the roll call of members. Again, if you just quickly switch on your camera, unmute yourself and say that you're here, that would be great. Amanda Boot. No. Chris Bottom.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Liz Bowes.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Claire Curran.
Yes, present, Chairman.
Thank you. Robert Evans.
All present and correct, ma'am.
Thank you. Peter Martin.
I'm here too, thank you.
Thank you. Simon Parr. Oh, sorry, we've had apologies from him. Sorry. Tanya Kuda. Present. Thank you. Leslie
If you said me, I couldn't hear you, Kate, but I'm here.
Steves. Yeah. Thank you. Alex Tier.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning. Barbara Thompson.
Yes, good morning. I'm here.
Thank you. Chris Townsend.
Yeah, here.
Thank you. Richard Walsh.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Richard. Okay, so we now turn to item 2 on the agenda, the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 21st of September 2020. Can we please approve those minutes as a true and accurate record of the proceedings?
Agreed.
Approved.
It's easier if I probably say, are there any dissensions? If you have a dissension, would you please indicate? No, thank you very much indeed. Declarations of interest. Peter Martin.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to declare a non-pecuniary interest in relation to the send item 5 on the agenda. I have a grandchild in reception year in a Surrey school who is the recipient of an EHCP.
Thank you very much. I don't anticipate us having any policy changing decisions today, and therefore I'm quite content for you to participate in the discussion for the duration of this meeting. If I feel that it becomes prejudicial, I will let you know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. So turning now to questions, petitions, we've had no questions or petitions for this meeting. So now we turn to the update on the Send Task Group recommendations. This is an item that I've asked the chairman of the former task group to chair, which is Chris Botton. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman, and can I thank Mary Bergier in particular for the detail of her report. Can I ask if colleagues from the department wish to make any introductory remarks to this report?
Thank you, Councillor Barton. Yes, I am Mary Berger. I'm the Assistant Director for Systems and Transformation in our education section of the Directorate. And I did author the report, but I have to acknowledge the contributions of my colleagues across those services that have been, despite a pandemic, been delivering some phenomenal work around SEND. And I guess I would just start by acknowledging the foresight of the task force in October 2019 in identifying its key lines of inquiry. These really are the relevant issues that we have been working on well over a year now. And I guess I would just reflect that in October 2019, the graduated response approach was in its infancy. SAFE, our Schools Alliance for Excellence, was also in its infancy. The Learner's Single Point of Access didn't exist. The Early Identification Fund didn't exist. Our contracting arrangements for independent schools was not robust. Our engagement with SENCOs was in a very early stage, and we had only just agreed phase 1 of our capital investment programme. So despite pandemic, we've come quite a long way, and I hope the report does give this committee a really good update of the progress that we've made on 8 of those 9 recommendations, the ninth of which was, of course, to bring this report to the select committee, the progress update, as we're doing now. And I'm really happy to answer any further questions that you might have about some of the detail around that work. But hopefully the report gives you a good overview of the steps that we've been taking and the really helpful recommendations that the task group made earlier this year to help guide that work. And I'll pause there. Thank you.
Mary, thank you very much for those introductory remarks, and as I've already said, for a very helpful response. I'm just seeing a hand from, is it Rob Norman?
It's gone again, actually, Chris.
Okay. Chris Townsend, then, if you'd like to start off with your questions, Chris, that'd be helpful.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. I think you've partly talked about it already, Mary, but what enabled a greater proportion of Surrey's SEN learners to attend school than the national average during COVID part 1, for want of a better phrase? How do we do that? I think partly answered that, but I'd be interested to know your views. Thank you.
Shall I answer each question in turn?
Yes, Mary, if you'd be so kind. I think that'll help us to keep them in mind. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, in the report, we highlight the fact that 23% of children with an EHCP attended school compared to 16% nationally. This is during the period of the lockdown. Obviously, it's much, much higher now. So looking at that period, we did a number of things. I mean, the report does highlight the fact that the graduated response team turned immediately into supporting a risk assessment of all children with an education, health and care plan, as well as other vulnerable learners. So we really, really knew which children were capable of attending school, in fact, where school would be better for them, so we could identify those children. We also worked really, and not all local authorities were able to undertake that process. We worked really, really closely with our schools, particularly our specialist schools, to make sure that they had robust infection control measures in place, that they had priority access to PPE. And in the early days, that wasn't an easy thing to do. And then thirdly, we ensured that there was director level oversight on a weekly basis of children attending school, and where we needed to respond, whether it was a particular setting or even particular families, we were able to do that in a really responsive way around those particular children. So it helped us to maintain the kind of trust and confidence, particularly of our parents, that their children would be well served to be in school.
Thank you very much indeed, Mary. Is that a satisfactory answer, Chris? You happy with that? Yeah, thank you very much. I'd be interested to know, you said we've gone up further. Any idea what the percentages are now?
I mean, we do monitor it on a weekly basis alongside Department for Education. It does vary, and I think when we talk about some, there are cases where children do have to go home to self-isolate, but I think we're looking at around the 85% mark. Okay. So we're it's not as high as those children without an EHCP, but I think we can probably understand, some of the medical reasons for that. But again, it's much, much higher than the 23% that we saw through lockdown. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Chris.
Chris, Julie Arms has indicated she wishes to speak, and it may be on this point. Could you check, please?
I was about to, Kay. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. It is to this point. I think it is a very good testament to the close working with our schools and the whole of our school community. And whenever we get the opportunity, I do like to say thank you to all of the school leaders who have been under tremendous amounts of pressure throughout this response to the COVID situation. And I know from my own experience of parents contacting with their concerns that our school relationships team and our area schools officers have been just fantastic about dealing with the schools and making sure that public health colleagues are providing advice and guidance where it's needed. So I thank all of them for the hard work that they've put into that. And at one stage, when schools went back, we were running at about 95% attendance. Now, that has slipped a bit because, as you'll appreciate, if there is COVID in the community, then there is COVID in the schools as well. So that has taken the percentage down as year groups have been isolating. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, and I'm very happy to endorse and associate myself with those remarks. I'm absolutely astonished at the performance of our schools in the circumstances. It's extraordinary. Barbara, I think your hand was next.
Yes. Can I ask, how is the availability of early intervention funded, promoted to education settings?
I can say that since it was launched in April 2020, the Early Intervention Fund has been promoted directly to early year settings through the weekly Childcare Professionals Bulletin. So that goes out to the entire sector. And we've really been kind of actively over the course since April 2020, really promoting it. It's also actively promoted through the early year SENCO networks that we hold, and also through the schools bulletin. And I think from the report, you'll see that over 250 settings have already accessed the funds in a variety of really innovative ways, and supporting upwards of 500 children now. So we do have every intention to continue it. And in fact, we're kind of extending it out so that other professionals, such as early years speech and language therapists, kind of really understand how they can use the fund and access it to support children.
Thank you, Mary. Does that answer your question, Barbara?
Yes, thank you. I think she wants to speak, doesn't she?
Next to speak is Robert Evans, who's been very patient. Robert.
Thank you, Chair. My point was actually in a follow-up to Councillor Townsend's first one. Is it all right to go to that?
Yes, by all means.
Yeah, I mean, and also, can I just agree with Councillor Isles, and from my experience going into local schools in my area, there's a huge amount of extra work that's been put in by staff in every department, including special needs. But I don't think back in March, when we first entered into this, anyone would have envisaged that we would still be going at it or it would still be going at us by Christmas, the COVID. And we don't know how much longer it's going to go on, as we were talking before about the possible continued rise. But in the light of that, what are the extra challenges that Mary thinks that schools might face with support for SND children, and indeed the stress and strain on staff and parents as well, as we continue into 2021 with this 19 crisis? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And I know Councillor Isles has her hand up, so she may wish to add on this point, or indeed any others. I mean, we know that when we talk long COVID, it isn't just a physical ailment. There is a kind of long, in terms of mental well-being, impacts for all children, not only those with SEND or other additional learning needs. So that's why we have been putting in a huge amount of effort and doing so with our schools, but also with our health colleagues in terms of supporting emotional well-being, emotional mental health and well-being. We write very frequently to all parents, and Councillor Isles and Liz Mills write regularly to all parents, and particularly to parents of children with SEND, to highlight the support that is available for them, but also for their children. So what we do realise is that once there will be that kind of longer term sense of children who have experienced bereavement in their lives, that simply will not end once we have a vaccine. I just invite Councillor Isles if she wanted to add anything to that or follow up on that.
The point I raised my hand at, just going back to the Early Intervention Fund, was that the very latest stats I have on that show that since April, over 620 children have benefited from that Early Intervention Fund. So I think that is making a significant difference. And for those who perhaps don't have all the details in front of them, it's not just about special education needs, it also takes account of some environmental considerations, so it might look at deprivation or early trauma, which also impacts on children not making expected progress. So it is a fund for people to be able to call off on that regard as well. And just to the point about how it's impacted on our children with special education needs, particularly for children who are somewhere on the autistic spectrum, then they are affected more rapidly than other children. You know, they need a routine, they need certainty. So we have seen placements breaking down, and we have had children having to move settings as a result of that. But I just wanted to point members to the papers which are coming through Cabinet tomorrow, where we have on the annual procurement forward planning the new contract for outreach work, which is around ASD, learning and language needs, and the social, emotional, mental health and wellbeing of our children. So this is about outreach work into mainstream settings. So again, I think we've got a decent foresight on what we need to provide here. So I wanted to just give that reassurance. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I'll ask a question about the foresight bit in a minute, but I'm going to ask Councillor Bowes if she'd like to speak next.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for this report. My question really is regarding that formal recommendation on page 21. The task group recommendations are very clear, and the progress that has been made, as you so rightly highlighted, is admirable. But obviously we need to keep this momentum up, and please can I ask that the recommendation includes perhaps a timeline so that we're looking at the progress made in perhaps 6 months or a year, so that we can really make sure that we're following up this very, very comprehensive report. Thank you.
I think that makes a huge amount of sense, and I'll ask the chairman of the committee if she'd be prepared to accept that addendum when we conclude this, but thank you. There's a question from me which relates to the modelling of specialist provision, and I wondered how, and it speaks to the point in a way that Councillor Isles has just mentioned. Are you confident that the number of places to be delivered under the SEND capital programme will be adequate? I'm obviously referring to the very exciting programme set out in paragraphs 13 to 17.
Yes, thank you. I don't know if Councillor Isles would like to come in on this.
Probably only to say the similar things than you would be saying, Mary, but if I go first, you can add anything that I've missed. The current forecast for the September 2021 demand is based on previous transition rates for our children who have the education, health and care plans. And it's about moving from mainstream to specialist places at the key stage transition. So that's the reception year, year 3, year 7, and further education from year 12. We've got plans to create 485 places in our own specialist provisions, and that's both in special schools and in specialist resource units. So not necessarily a whole special school, but a unit at these schools. And it is about us not relying on specialist places in the non-maintained and independent sector, because quite a few of those are out of county. We've had to do that in previous years to meet capacity. but we're also looking at consulting on the bandings that we apply across our special schools, so that the specialisms and the way they're described are consistent when we're talking about placements and potentially moving a child within those bands, so that the package of care across them is consistent and well known to all the practitioners. And that should also help with the capacity, rather than there being a specialisation that our schools can't meet. It gives more flexibility within their own areas of need. And we've also employed a very specific forecasting provider, something called Mastodon C, which sounds a bit like a dinosaur, but it is actually a specialist package that has helped us to model this demand, and it has been, I think, much more rigorous than it has been in previous years. Mary, is there anything you want to add to that?
I would just add one point to say that whilst it may sound very technical, the undertaking the Schedule 2s for 1,100 children who are in our independent schools has given us a really clear picture of their needs. And what we've seen through that is that their needs could be met in maintained specialist schools. There is largely their needs aren't so complex or so specialised that 1,100 children would need to be in independent schools. So it then gives us that insight and intelligence to commission, to build, invest in our own maintained specialist provision with a degree of confidence that expanding that capacity will mean much less reliance on independent sector in future.
So that's fascinating, Mary. Are we expecting then to commission the right number of places to almost eliminate our reliance on the independent sector? Is that the sort of planning, or are we setting a target of a proportion of them?
I think at this stage it would be premature. What it's shown us is the art of the possible, and looking at children, particularly at key stage transfers. We know that moving from primary to secondary, if we've got sufficient provision in our maintained specialist schools, that we ought to be able to meet the vast majority of those needs in our own schools, closer to home, which has been our kind of stated intention, our stated strategy through the SEND strategy for a time. So this is about beginning to deliver that sort of step change, that transformation to bring children closer to home where we can.
And has our work with the South Bank University paid off in terms of helping us to understand demand, or has that work not yet delivered specific outcomes?
I think the work with South Bank was particularly helpful around autism and drawing upon the expertise in terms of their academic expertise, in terms of understanding the incidence of autism, how it manifests itself, and how we can, as I think as Councillor Isles was saying, is commission provision, ensure that our maintained provision actually is meeting the needs, particularly of children with autism in Surrey, which is the highest need group in the county.
Thank you. My final question is this. The Council is currently consulting on changes to the way in which SEND support is funded. Could I just ask why this committee wasn't invited to participate or contribute to the framing of that consultation?
Good question.
Well, shall I take that one? And I'll just put my hand down. Work with South Bank University as well, just to go back on that point, has also been informing the all-age autism strategy. So it's also about that pathway into adulthood and preparing for the transitions around that. So it's not just in isolation in the early years setting. I think, Chris, you're probably talking about the ongoing consultation with the Schools Forum, which, for those who don't know, Schools Forum is the body that consults every year on the passing out of government funding, so the Direct Schools Grant and the various formulas within it. The consultation that has come out of that is about catching up with the census data around the October period when DFE issued those for some schools who have additional pupils with educational healthcare plans. But it is a very complicated area. I mean, I've taken weeks and days to look at this and the way that the funding is distributed. And it is very much a business as usual paper, as I might have said already, with Schools Forum. The consultation is online. We're asking head teachers and governing bodies for their input to it. And it goes back to Schools Forum for discussion in January. I think it's January the 12th. And from there, any decisions would be made in consultation with Forum. It went through Cabinet as a paper on the 24th of November. And I think this committee has the ability to call in the decisions from that Cabinet. But it is still very much consultation that is underway, so nothing decided on it. I don't know whether that answers your question, Chris.
No, I think the point is that the Cabinet paper was quite difficult to follow. I think you'd have had to have pre-warning fully to understand the comprehensive nature of what you were consulting on. And I think the plea that I'd ask the chairman of the committee to hear from me is that it would be very helpful if this committee in future, particularly because of the level of its expertise, were to be apprised of consultations before they occurred rather than having to pick them up afterwards. It's just that we are so committed to ensuring that the programme of special needs provision in the county works well. We'd like to be involved, and I think we could contribute and help to scrutinise the outcomes of some of that. So while I understand what you're saying about it being business as usual, there is a substantial reduction being consulted upon in special need funding, and it just would seem to have been appropriate for this committee to have been able to consider the concerns. Chris Townsend, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chris. I just wanted to fully support you in that. I do think I totally agree with you. I think the committee should have been involved, and I hope in the future Cabinet will actually move that way. We are very much involved in this, and as Chris has quite rightly said, we do have a level of expertise. I think it's a shame it didn't happen, but I'm sure in the future Julie's taken on board what's been said, and we do get the sort of consultation and involvement this scrutiny committee should have. Thank you.
Well, can I just push back on something slightly there? This is a very, very small element of the special needs funding. If we put it into context, the total amount of net funding in the direct schools grant is just short of 500 million. The direct schools grant is 271 million of that. Central services retain about 6 million in round terms. Early years comes out separately at 75 million. And the high needs block then has about £144 million within it. This is an additional discretionary funding that goes to schools with Schools Forum previous agreement on the formula. And it's less than 1%. It's 0.08% of the overall figures. Many other local authorities don't still employ this formula because we've moved to the national funding formula. There are 3 different elements of pupil funding for special education needs, which should cover the first 6,000, and then there is top-ups within that. So this is a very small part of that. As I said, business as usual for Schools Forum to be looking at these formulas, but it's not happening in isolation. This is about the use of that discretionary element along with the independent personal support budgets, which is the second element of consultation with Schools Forum. And that's where this money is perhaps going to be used by clusters of schools to support each school with the children in there that have the education, health and care plans. So it would give flexibility to schools to decide how many pupils in which school, what level of support do they need, and potentially the ability to then employ, say, speech and language therapists going into one school one day a week, another school within the cluster a different day of the week. So it's about groups of children rather than individual support in terms of teaching hours. So it's not happening in isolation, and it's a very small discretionary amount. But we will take forward perhaps what papers this committee needs to see that go to school forum.
Are there any other questions from my colleagues? In which case, Chairman, I'll hand back to you following that helpful discussion, bearing in mind that Councillor Bowes has proposed an extension to the main recommendation, which I'll now leave in your hands. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris, and thank you for managing that superbly. So the recommendation that we have on this paper is on page 21 at item 33. The Select Committee is asked to note the significant work underway to implement the SEND transformation programme and the recommendation of the SEND task group. Could we add to that, please, that this committee requests a progress update in, and I'm suggesting September 2020, to get over the fact that there will be a new committee formed after elections in May, and I think that a committee needs to settle in, and it's between Liz's sort of 6 months to a year, so it's 9 months on, and I think that would be an appropriate time to check on progress. So that's the first alteration to a recommendation that I'm suggesting. It also, because you were wanting the timeline, and so that would actually deal with that particular item. I'm suggesting as well, following this discussion, that it might be worth asking Mary or Julie whether this is feasible, but I think that in the view of the last debate, that we could ask for that the cabinet or the cabinet members appraise the committee of forthcoming consultations. I mean, it can be done in a very simple spreadsheet that I think that could be given to the committee, and then we could actually, sorry, something's popped up on the screen. So that then we can actually see which of these consultations is something that the committee A, we can look out for, but B, is this something that we really need to bring to the committee in light of all the other different elements of the work of this committee. So I'm just looking at what.
I think we're talking about September to come back, I think.
Yes, that's what I was suggesting. September 2021, yes. Yes, and also the outreach offer. That we share the redesign of the outreach offer. It said in the paper was let me just check where my paperwork was on that. Yes, at paragraph 9 we were talking about the outreach review, and it said it was expected to have a proposed model for consultation by the end of December 2020. So we're suggesting, we've got 2 number 1s there, Ben, at the moment. So the Director of Education, Learning, Culture share the redesign outreach offer once completed with the committee. The third one, that we advise the Children, Families, Lifelong Learning, Culture Select Committee of consultations at the time when those consultations are published.
That third recommendation, Madam Chairman, of course, would cover all consultations published by the Directorate. I don't know if we want to limit that just to education consultations.
No, I don't. I think that it would be useful to have them all. I mean, if it's a spreadsheet, it shouldn't be too difficult to populate and have it updated. And it also means that I'm not actually suggesting at the time when those consultations are published, because we may want to influence what is said in a consultation. And quite often we have asked for an early indication so that we can influence how the consultation takes place. So yes, as soon as practicable is better, because it's then sometimes we can see it before the actual consultation takes place. And it may be just we have a small working group looking at that to see how we can influence the committee. Okay, so I've got Julie, but also Rachel wanting to speak. So can I ask Rachel, please, first?
I just wanted to remark on the fact that within the Directorate there are sometimes requirements for statutory consultations. In other words, they're laid down by government, so the kind of things might be around school admissions, and neither this committee nor indeed the Directorate itself can really influence the content of those consultations. So although I absolutely take the point that you're making, you will find that there are some consultations where what we're allowed to put out and consult on is pretty much prescribed, and I just wanted that to be clear for members.
Thank you very much for that and for that confirmation. We are always told when the admission consultation as members goes out, so that is something that we're well aware of. And again, that could be put into a spreadsheet, a column which says statutory requirement. It would just, allow that transparency of those consultations. Thank you, Rachel. Julie.
Yes, just with regard to recommendation 2, the outreach offer, we have got on your forward schedule, I think for the 11th of March, alternate provision, which probably links to this recommendation at number 2, because as you quite rightly said, we're looking at that being the proposed model for consultation at the end of December to bring back to committee in advance of the procurement on that, which is the matter that I spoke to earlier for Cabinet.
Thank you for that. So that recommendation obviously will be fulfilled once that happens. So can I ask members that you are content with those 3 recommendations, please?
Yeah. Agreed.
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 Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for very quickly putting those together for us. Okay, so that concludes that item 5 on the agenda. We move now to item 6, which is the Cabinet response to the report of the No Wrong Door Task Group. And I'm asking Leslie to introduce the report. If you could start off, please, Leslie.
Thank you, Chairman. I have got a little bit of a throat, so I'm sorry if I sound a bit gravelly. But today I'm presenting a report in relation to the Cabinet response to the report of the No Wrong Door Task Group, both of which were considered by Cabinet on the 27th of October 2020. I'm pleased to report to the committee that Cabinet Member for Children, Young People and Families has accepted 6 of the task group's recommendations outright and has accepted the essence of the remaining 3. In respect of recommendation 8, I was pleased to learn that the name No Wrong Door will not be well known by young people, and note the Cabinet Member's view that the name may help attract staff to the new service. I therefore support the Cabinet Member's decision to maintain the name No Wrong Door for the service. In respect of recommendations 1 and 2, I am assured by the Cabinet Member's representation that the accreditation of Surrey's No Wrong Door by North Yorkshire County Council will not prevent the further development of the service to meet local need, and I am satisfied for the reasons the Cabinet Member has set out in her response that the benefits of accrediting the model outweigh the cost of doing so. I support the Cabinet Member's decision to proceed with accreditation. I'm also today recommending in my report that the Select Committee agree that the assurances provided by the Cabinet member satisfactorily address the concerns underlying recommendations 1, 2 and 8 and endorse the Cabinet member's decision in respect of those recommendations. Finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to again thank all those task group members who contributed their time and knowledge to this inquiry, particularly those persons and organisations external to the Council who submitted written evidence or met with the task group to discuss the No Wrong Door model. I'd also like to thank the officers that were helping with this task group. Thank you, Chairman. Before I pass over to Kay to do the questioning, I would like to ask Richard Walsh to start with his first question. So Richard, over to you, and then Kay, I will pass over to you to control the questions and the recommendation. Thank you.
Richard, before you start, could I please just ask the witnesses to introduce themselves, please? Tina? Sorry, you're mute.
Sorry. My name's Tina Benjamin. I'm Director of Corporate Parenting and here to answer any questions alongside Mary.
Thank you. And Mary. And you're on mute still.
Morning committee. My name is Mary Lewis. I'm the Cabinet for Children, Young People and Families Wellbeing. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that it may seem obvious because we know you well, but if this meeting is being broadcast out to others, it's really important that members of the public know your positions and what you are when we're asking you questions. So thank you for that indulgence. So over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much indeed, Kay. And it's nice to greet Mary and Tina. I've got a question here, which is, please can you update the committee on the progress of the No Wrong Door project? When will the No Wrong Door become operational in shadow form? When will the No Wrong Door become fully operational? Are there any risks of which the committee should be aware? The report has indicated timings, but I really want to know whether or not those are we're meeting them, and also if you have any more specific dates that you can give us. Thank you.
I'll hand over to Tina for the operational update and then perhaps pop in at the end, if I may, Chairman. Thank you.
So you're still muted.
Yeah, just doing so. So probably the key task that we've done to date is to employ a service manager to take responsibility for this work going forward, and we've done that, and we're very pleased about that. And we have been working with which of the homes that we wish to start the rollout with. So you know our aspiration was to start in shadow form from January. We're now, as part of our larger review of our residential children's homes, looking at where we might base the first hub. And alongside that, we've got the capital development in terms of new buildings for this work. But obviously, we don't want to wait for that, because this is about a model of working which we need quite urgently in terms of our response to young people. So we've started booking the key training, and that is very much very important in relation to how the rollout of this, because we need the staff to understand the model and to engage with partners, because this is very much a multi-agency model where we need to work across the service. So, for example, there was a event on Friday, a Safeguarding Adolescence event, where No Wrong Door was very much part of that conference and very much part of the suite of responses that we give to young people who are on the edge of care or indeed in our care. So we're starting to look at how we roll this work out, not just with the staff team that will be part of the No Wrong Door approach, but how we do that with the wider colleagues within social care and indeed with other agencies that we need to be involved with us. So we've set up an operational group of staff members who are beginning to work through what that would mean for them in their own areas and what that might look like. And that's had good multi-agency attendance so far. So I think we're on target to start in shadow form in January, February. We've also developed the roles and the job descriptions, including what that might look like for foster carers who would want to be part of this model. And we're starting to identify what the eligibility and pathways are for young people so that we could look at the detailed processes and procedures. And this is where it will be really helpful to work alongside North Yorkshire, because of course they've already done all of this work. So it will help us to work with them about what were the pitfalls they found, how we should move forward, and use their learning.
Thank you, Tina. Are you content with that answer, Richard?
Yes, I am. It certainly indicates that everything is on target, and that's fine with me. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Mary.
Thank you. Richard mentioned risk. In terms of risk, I think we should also think about the risk of not introducing something different for teenagers. In lockdown 2 and in the months that led up to it, we've continued to take a number of teenagers into care. We're an outlier on this. And I think we are definitely, given that what we know about the poor outcomes for teenagers who come into care, we really need to get going with some urgency on a new approach to teenagers on the edge of care. And therefore, I'm really grateful to the task group for the way they were very quick over the summer to look into this and to support the introduction of the No Wrong Door policy. So I just wanted to highlight the urgency, the risk of not doing something different, and to thank the task group for their support.
Thank you. And I have Tanya.
Hello. Have you decided where the No Wrong Door hubs are to be located? And if so, why were these locations chosen?
What we will have decided is that we'll spread them across the county, and we have looked at where we've taken in most young people in terms of teenagers, but it will be as much about availability and the right location for young people. And obviously we don't have, unending choices on that, but we have looked at where we've taken in most young people into care and from which quadrant in the county.
So you said it'll be spread. Have any specific locations been indicated yet?
Walton is the first location that we have, so that would be in the northeast of the county, yes. And that's part of the children's homes development that I mentioned in the earlier question.
Yeah. Tanya, are you content?
So the reason why Walton was chosen is because of the previous, what you've just mentioned in regards to the children's services. Is that right?
It's important to have the hubs where the children are most likely to come from because they're in their locality then. But it's also important to have areas where staff can get to relatively easily and that it's not too rural, because these are not children's homes, they're hubs alongside children's homes. So it's a slightly different way of working. But it's also important that we use the sort of broader learning and that we work with our colleagues in other areas. So we're mindful of that. But in terms of the children's home that we've already identified a site for, that it fits all those criteria. So the Walton site fits not only our children's home development, but our hub work. So it's working alongside.
Okay, and in the report mentioned 2 hubs. So as yet, you haven't got a second location?
What we would ideally like is it to be in the southeast, actually, in terms of where our young people come from. That's what we've looked at, where the young people are coming into care from.
But as such, nothing.
It's not confirmed yet. No.
Not confirmed. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Mary, did you want to come in on that?
I was just wondering if Tina could elaborate on a little on that, in the sense that we're not waiting for the hubs and that the work can continue without a building, and using our existing residential estate across the county is a planned way of starting, isn't it, Tina? So the hub that you're talking about, Tina, is something more permanent, but a hub to get started with could be anywhere that we've got a residential property with space in it.
Yes. So the model of working doesn't rely on the building entirely, but having a building and the beds available will enhance that model of working. So that's when we talk about starting in shadow form, we're talking about the ethos of working in a multi-agency way with a committed group of practitioners to the young people. Now, obviously, having the beds in the home enhances the possibility of doing that, but it's part of the solution, not the whole solution. So that's why we say when we're talking in shadow form, we're not going to wait until everything's in place, because we would be waiting too long, and actually we need to get on with this model sooner rather than later. But it also gives the staff the opportunity to start that work and to learn together with partners how to do this alongside the support we're going to get from North Yorkshire. So it is about getting this work started sooner rather than later, and not just waiting for ideal circumstances, because that's not what we think would be helpful.
Thank you very much for that. I've got a question myself now. This is, I think, particularly for Mary. On the 29th of September, the Cabinet agreed a refreshed organisational strategy. Just really, does the No Wrong Door project support the Council's new priorities of tackling inequality, driving inclusive growth, creating a greener future and enabling resilient and connected communities?
Thank you. One of the main things about this is we do know that outcomes for teenagers who come into care are not good, as I've previously mentioned. Long-term life chances are not enhanced for the majority of them. Children that come into care younger, it's a different story. So making sure no one's left behind would definitely be served by this No Wrong Door policy, because it focuses on keeping children, or adolescents rather, safe where they are in their families. We know that families experiencing poverty and disadvantage and children from BAME backgrounds are more likely to be referred to children's social care. So the fact that we're working more with families and looking at cultural and other differences that might have led to them being referred to children's social care, we can overcome those things. We can support differently by using a No Wrong Door approach. Another of the priorities that you mentioned was about an economy that works for everyone. There could be an aspect when this work's going on with adolescents of looking at ways that their skills can be enhanced, that they can be encouraged not to become neat, because obviously if they're out of education, they're not doing anything purposeful, it's much harder to keep them safe in their families. So looking at an economy which emphasises skills and employment for young people, all of this would be part of what we're looking at here. And obviously keeping young people in their communities. Resilient and connected communities are built when the community is supporting young people and that we're delivering our work close to their homes. So all of those things. I'm not sure about the greener aspect, Kay. I suppose you could say if hard to necessarily look at it from that point of view, but there are no contraindications between this priority and No Wrong Door. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. And just for members of the committee to remind them, and any members of the public watching, NEAT stands for Not in Employment, Education and Training. I know it's so easy for us to roll these things off. Some people may not have understood what NEAT was. Thank you for that, Mary. Chris Townsend, next.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to touch on the North Yorkshire connection and also the name, which I think is an interesting name. I think the question really is, and this is a hypothetical question, if hypothetically North Yorkshire County Council did not hold the intellectual property rights in respect of the name No Wrong Door and the model's 10 distinguishing features, but still had offered to accredit the council's No Wrong Door service, would you still have opted for accreditation? And why would you do that?
I think we would if they didn't have an accreditation, we would have still wanted to work with them. That's what I would say. And indeed, we had a visit from North Yorkshire in 2018 when we first thought about this model, because actually when you introduce something, having a well-established system where people have learned, it's always helpful to learn from others. And I think they were well praised in the when it was evaluated independently. North Yorkshire got a very positive outcome in terms of the work they've done. So I think learning from others is always helpful. So I think we'd have always wanted to be involved with them, even if they hadn't wanted us to be accredited in the way that they currently do. And in terms of the name,
the name's a cracker.
Yeah, I think the name has become widely understood in social work circles in essence. So I think it's helpful in the sense that people know what you're trying to achieve by using that name and what that might mean. And I take the point that, you know, the committee looked at discussion and had that discussion with young people who weren't sure about the name. But I think in terms of the cabinet members' response, what we said was it's not necessarily the name that we'd use with young people. They don't need to know that that's the name that we're using. They just need to understand that they're feeling held and supported in a way that feels more appropriate for them, really. And the building can have any name that we want to give it. And indeed, they should be consulted with around that.
I think that's a good answer, because I think it was interesting. The young people definitely were, let's say the word nervous of the name, but I take your point. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chris. Robert Evans, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I was pleased to serve as a member of this task group, which met, as colleagues will be aware, in challenging circumstances due to COVID-19. And in that light, what special challenges do Tina and others perhaps think that young people, No Wrong Door, corporate parents and the young people concerned face as we go forward with this COVID-19 still continuing? And how can we best prepare for this, bearing in mind, of course, we don't quite know what's going to happen?
I think probably the biggest challenge for young people has been the isolation in many respects. Obviously, there are different challenges for parents in terms of what they've experienced. But in terms of young people, I think the isolation from their friends and for school, particularly during the first lockdown, has been what's been significant. And we've seen that impacting on their emotional well-being. So I think that's something we'd need to be very mindful of across all our social work practice, but particularly in terms of No Wrong Door, because they will likely be a group of young people that may well have difficulties socially anyway. And so that isolation that they've experienced as part of the lockdowns, or indeed if there are future lockdowns, is, I think, the most significant impact on their emotional well-being that we'd want to be mindful of.
Are you content with that answer, Robert?
Yes, I mean, I think so. I don't think any of us know, but I think that isolation is a good one. I think there probably could be, taking that one stage further, the corporate parenting, the families that they're with, could have additional challenges if young people with issues are going to spend much longer in the house at home than out, as you say, with their friends socialising. So it's going to be two-way, the stress.
Yeah. That's what I meant when I said there are additional challenges for parents in terms of their parenting. In relation to young people, I think it's about the impact of isolation and social media and all of those things. In terms of parents, I think there are additional challenges, and that we will have seen nationally, there's been a rise in domestic abuse, and so other factors that are parenting challenges which are different to young people's challenges, I would say, although obviously they're all completely interlinked.
Thank you. Mary.
Just by way of an advertisement, to remind members that there will be a member seminar on emotional wellbeing and mental health of young people from 2:00. So this perhaps could explore those issues a little more from then. We also had a very helpful discussion at the full council about how poverty will be affecting more families in Surrey potentially in the next few years. And when we come to the forward work programme, I was going to suggest that perhaps the committee would like to follow up on how that is being helped, and supported. Families are being supported through poverty in the months ahead. So I think that's another aspect which Tina hasn't touched on. But the longer term effects of COVID are going to be very much economic pressures on families, and beginning to see those already, and those do affect the numbers of referrals into social care because they add to pressure on families in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. So that concludes all the questions and the hands up that have been presented themselves. So could we turn now to the recommendations from this report. Thank you, Ben. We're recommending two particular recommendations: the assurances provided by the Cabinet Member for Children, Young People and Families in respect of recommendations 1, 2 and 8 of the report of the No Wrong Door Task Group satisfactorily addresses the concerns underlying those recommendations. And recommendation 2 is that the Children, Families, Lifelong Learning and Culture Select Committee endorses the decision of the Cabinet Member for Children, Young People, Families to proceed with the accreditation of the Surrey County Council's No Wrong Door service by the North Yorkshire County Council and to maintain the name No Wrong Door for the service. Are we content to agree those recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed, Chairman. Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed.
Agreed.
Okay, so can we now turn to item 7 on the agenda, which is the scrutiny of the draft budget and medium-term financial strategy. We have various witnesses here. Obviously, both our Cabinet members are still in attendance, both Julie Owls and Mary Lewis. And can we have Rachel, you've already put your camera on. Thank you very much. If you can introduce yourself, and thereafter Liz, if she's managed to get out of her other meeting, and anybody else who is helping to present this particular item. Rachel.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm Rachel Wigley. I'm Director of Financial Insight. I'm going to share the slides, but my colleague Mark Hack-Sanders is doing the first 6 slides, and then I'll take you through the rest. So I'll just share.
Thank you very much. So we are going to have a presentation, and members will have seen in the papers that there is the slides have been sent to you, and obviously the narrative now will become apparent as they are presented. Thank you very much.
Morning, everyone. I'm Mark Hack-Sanders. I'm the Strategic Finance Business Partner for Corporate Finance. And so before Rachel moves on to the specifics for children's, families, lifelong learning and culture, I will start by providing some context to the corporate budget position for the draft budget and the process that we took to get there. So to introduce the pack, the purpose of the pack is to set out to Select Committee the 21-22 draft budget and the medium-term financial strategy, with a particular focus on the budget gap for 21-22 and a view of the funding position from 21-22 through to 25-26. So in terms of the process to date, we've gone through a number of iterations of the 2021 budget to stabilise the council's finances as a result of COVID-19. And alongside that, finance have worked with colleagues from strategic and integrated planning to establish a set of core planning assumptions. So these are the assumptions and the scenarios that we've used to build the draft budget position. So in order to arrive at those planning assumptions, we used the PESTLE framework, which is an established framework focusing on political, economic, social, technological, legal and environmental factors. So essentially, we have done an assessment of the likely operating environment for the County Council for 21-22 and over the medium term. And obviously COVID-19 has featured highly on that framework alongside demand pressures and inflation. And that's been coordinated alongside the strategic reset. And so the work to date has culminated in a draft budget that was presented to Cabinet on the 24th of November, and that showed a gap for 21-22 to close of 18.3 million. And that's the difference between the funding that we expect to receive as a council and the expected spending pressures in directorates. So from that draft budget position, The next steps are to close the gap, because we have a legal duty to set a balanced budget for each financial year. And as part of the closing the gap, the main pieces of work really are to refine those core planning assumptions, refine the funding assumptions, and to review the directorate gaps. So in doing so, we'll be finalising the efficiency and the transformation proposals for each directorate. Separate pieces of work alongside that are to finalise the 21-22 to 25-26 capital programme. A consultation with residents is ongoing and will conclude in mid-December, along with the production of equality impact assessments for any of the efficiency savings. And the work that we are undertaking now will culminate in the final budget presented to Cabinet in January 2021 for approval by Council in February 21. Next slide, please, Rachel. So this slide is really for context. It's to illustrate the link that the budget has with the Community Vision for 2030 and the 4 new priority objectives of the Council. The finance team and strategic and integrated planning, along with the transformation unit and colleagues from across every directorate, have worked in a really integrated way throughout drafting the budget. So this is a budget that has been built integrated across services, across service planning, and across the capital programme. So I won't dwell on the context slide there, but it is really to make the point that the budget has been built around the 4 priority objectives with the Community Vision for 2030 in mind. Thanks, Rachel. So presenting now is the draft budget showing the £18.3 million gap between directorate spending need and our funding, and it shows the gap on a directorate by directorate basis. So of the £18.3 million gap, the main areas are £5 million in adult social care, £5.9 million in children, families, lifelong learning and culture, and another £5.9 million in environment, transport and infrastructure. So we will continue to iterate the pressures and efficiencies that have been included in the draft budget, and in particular we'll continue to iterate our funding estimates. So in November, we received the government's spending review, which gives us high-level direction of funding for MHCLG and local authorities generally, but we are still waiting for clarity on exactly what that means. And the full clarity will come through what's known as the local government settlement, and we're expecting that imminently. The date changes on a daily basis, but we're now expecting that towards the end of this week. And at present, we have relative confidence that we will be able to close the 18.3 million gap without recourse to further directorate efficiencies. And that will obviously depend on how spending pressures iterate over the next few weeks and how the settlement is confirmed through how the funding is confirmed through the settlement. Thanks, Rachel. So just to set some context for how we've calculated the medium-term financial plan, because it's good practice to look beyond the incoming financial year. So as we've said, directorates were tasked with costing the core planning assumptions and a set of scenarios to arrive at pressures and efficiencies. And that focused on 21-22 necessarily, but also looked ahead right through to 25-26. And similarly, we have estimated likely council funding over the 5-year period. And obviously we'll review the budget each financial year across the period as our funding picture becomes more clear and as directorate pressures become more clear. And I think one of the variables in setting the budget, particularly for 21-22, is the impact of COVID-19 and the extent to which that will continue into next financial year. Rachel, next slide, please. So just to give some context, as we've said, the funding gap for 21-22 based on our draft funding assessment was 18.3 million, but As I said, we are relatively confident, pending the settlement, that we will be able to close that gap for 21-22. The headline here really, and the longer term financial context, is that the council will see growth pressures of an estimated 244 million over the 5-year period. And against that, we've identified efficiencies to date of 113 million. So along with a reduction in funding that we anticipate, we estimate that over the 5-year period, there will be reductions to find of 170 million. That funding reduction comes through what's known as the Fair Funding Review. So that's a government review of the amount of funding that local authorities receive. And we expect to lose funding as a result of that review, although the Fair Funding Review itself has been delayed by at least 2 successive financial years now, so we're expecting it to start to affect our funding from 22-23, but we've yet to have that confirmed. Rachel, next slide. So that's everything from a corporate point of view. I see that there is a question in the comments, Chair. Would you like me to address that now, or?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Rachel, sorry, if you wouldn't mind going back one slide. Where we say, sorry, if I could just clarify the question, where we say that the numbers along the bottom don't cross-cast, can I just clarify the question, please?
That came from Nick Harrison. Nick, can you put your camera on and speak, please?
Yes, it's if I add up 18.3, 29.1, 50.2 and 37, I don't get 170. That's my question.
I think, Nick, in the original presentation, the year 23-24 was omitted by error. So we've added it into this presentation so you can see it. So if you add 35.4 on, you get to the 170.
Yeah, there's a year column.
Quick calculator, because I can't add up those figures in my head quickly enough. Really sorry.
No, they do add up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nick. So you can move on now, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is to take you through the specifics of the Children, Family, Lifelong Learning and Culture draft budget. So the services provided, as I know you're aware, are set out here, and the purpose to ensure that Surrey's children and families get the help and support they need at the right time. And there are 7 strategic priorities for 2021 alongside ongoing business as usual responsibilities, and you can see the 7 priorities set out below. So the response to the pandemic, starting well, the children's services improvement, the SEND and additional needs transformation, emotional health and wellbeing, libraries and cultural services transformation, and enabling our people to use technology and embedding equality and diversity. So in terms of how the service budget is spent, you can see that the budget, excluding the dedicated schools grant, is 251 million. And the largest part of that, so shown in green in the pie chart, is corporate parenting, followed by education, lifelong learning and culture, and then commissioning and family resilience. So the service strategy for 21 to 26 for CFLC is focused on the key areas of transformation that I just went through very quickly, the 7 areas. Obviously the Ofsted rating continues to be a primary focus, but there are other issues that we're addressing with a financial aspect. So the expenditure on placements there's a real focus there, looking to expand the council's internal provision. There's the transformation programme. I saw the task group earlier on in the agenda, so there's the work on the SEND transformation programme and to try and reduce the SEND expenditure. because of the effect that that has on the council's general fund to stabilise the balance sheet, and I'll go on to that in a little later. And then we've got lots of changes within the integrated commissioning and strengthening the way that we deliver and continue to develop the integrated care system to improve outcomes for residents, and doing that in a partnership way. So the next slide just sets out the 21 to 26 budget summary for children, families, lifelong learning and culture. And you'll see that there are pressures over the 5 years that we've looked at of 154.3 million and efficiencies proposed so far of 164. So we have a reduction still to find of 22.6 million. The cumulative gap is 22.6, as I've said. However, there's an assumption that there'll be a spike in looked after children's referrals caused by the COVID crisis, and that we think that that will reduce from 22-23 onwards, but that does create a reduction in the financial requirement in that 1 year. The funding available, as Mark has already set out, is going to be reviewed through the local government finance settlement, and we'll know further, we're hoping, towards the end of this week. So this slide here just sets out the issues that we've got within the high needs block, which I think you're probably well aware of, but I'll just explain to you. What we do, because we're overspending within the high needs block, is we create within the general fund a contribution to an offsetting reserve that we can't use to pay the overspend on the high needs block, because the general fund cannot contribute directly to the high needs block. But what we do is provide for it within the balance sheet to create some resilience. And that overspend within the high needs block, we've got a budget of 24 million. If the deficit on the high needs block in any 1 year goes above that, then that's obviously a pressure on the general fund to continue to contribute into that reserve. And what this slide is showing you, if you look from 1920 onwards, so if you start on the left-hand side, you'll see the 1920 out-turn position. We had grant of 151 million, an approved overspend of 29, and what you probably can't see is a small unapproved overspend, because in total it was 30 million. Going into this year, we had demand and inflation of 18 million, which would have caused a pressure in total when you look at our grant of 39 million. So the transformation programme has been tasked with finding cost containment. That's the green 15 million on the slide. What we're seeing at the moment in 2021 is that we've got grants of 160 million, approved overspend of 24, and currently a forecast overspend on top of that 24 of another 8 million, which therefore causes increased pressure on the general fund of another £8 million. And then you can see it, how that moves across the years that we've projected. So this slide sets out all the budgeted pressures that we've got. So 21 to 22 budgeted pressures of 61.6 million, and in total over the 5-year MTFS of 92.6. And again, we're happy to answer any queries at the end of the presentation. These are all the planned efficiencies. So 55.7 million for 21-22. And then finally, the capital programme. So the CFLC capital programme totals 3 million over 5 years, and you can see that split over the education management system, adaptations for children with disabilities, the foster carers grant and school kitchens, and you can see how that's spread over the financial years. And they are schemes that are directly delivered by the service. There are also projects that sit within IT&D programme, and a number of projects that are included within the property capital programme or within pipeline. And so you can see the next table shows you that there are £270.4 million worth of capital programmes included within the property capital budget. So covering schools basic need, capital maintenance, priority schools building programme and SEND strategy, as well as pipeline allocations that I spoke about. So that's the end of the presentation. We're very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that. I'll just bring up my participants thing. I'd like to start off actually before I bring Chris Townsend in. What I'm concerned about, you've talked about in your presentation of some of the issues concerning referrals, some of the issues concerning obviously COVID-19, which are unprecedented anyway. And we've seen the RAG-rated planned deficiencies. But could you, or could somebody please tell me what the key risks and the financial challenges faced by the Directorate in the short and the medium term? So the short term, first of all, and the medium term. So the presentation doesn't really bring out the risks that we're facing. And if you could reiterate those, please. I don't know who wants to speak to that.
Shall I start, and then I'm sure that anybody from Liz.
Hello, Liz. Hello, welcome.
Hello, Kay. Hello, Chair. Well, I'm happy to come in if that's helpful, just to talk about that. I mean, I think in large part the risks as they sort of manifest themselves in terms of the finances are around demand, and also the ways in which we can meet that demand and the unit cost. So what we're seeing is not just increasing volumes, and that's in a number of areas. So it is in the cases that are sort of coming through our front door arrangements, as you'll have heard in different forums, but it's also children with additional needs. So right across our system, we're seeing some of those COVID impacts. Anxiety is much higher for children, so lots of different changing needs as well. And so I would say the acuity of those needs also has an impact on the potential unit cost in terms of being able to meet those needs. So the way in which we've responded is to strengthen the systems we already have in place. And as you know, we've been doing a lot of work introducing different parts of that system across the course of the last year, and that will stand us in good stead in terms of being able to meet that demand. So we've got all of the work that we're doing, of course, around family resilience, our learner spa, our special educational needs strategy, the work that we've been doing in the event in reducing absence and exclusions, and now newly the work that Jackie Burke and Tina have been leading in terms of the community family resilience networks as well, bringing in the voluntary and community sector as well through their sort of early help, strengthening those arrangements. So, but in very simple terms, it boils down in cost to volume and unit cost of meeting that demand.
Thank you very much. I've got a flurry of hands now, so I think what I might do for efficiency purposes is take two at a time. I think doing more than that is more difficult to deal with, and for people's concentration levels in this format to be maintained. So if I can call first Chris Townsend and then Robert Evans. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Mine's a general query, although it's specifically relevant to children as well, is every year we have efficiencies. There are efficiencies, there are savings, or they're cuts. Every single year, going back 5-10 years, we have these so-called efficiencies, and we've got them again going forward for well over 100 million pounds. How can we keep on providing these efficiencies year on year? And in the light of your previous answer concerning the risks going forward, even more so, how can we keep doing this? We're either very, very inefficient in lots of areas because we're making efficiencies, or what? What's worse is the government sees this and sees local government in general, oh yeah, they can take on, these efficiencies, these cuts, they can do it, so therefore we won't give you so much money. And that's a view that is often taken from central government. My concern is that Surrey consistently.
Sorry, can we just make sure that it is a question?
Yeah, well, the question is, where are these efficiencies coming from and going to? Because they're far in excess of what we should be doing on the basis that we're going forward with the problems we have. Thank you.
And then Robert.
Thank you. A short and sharp follow-up to that, really. Isn't efficiencies just a euphemism for cuts? And it would be more honest to use cuts. Otherwise, it just suggests that this council has been inefficient over years.
Thank you. Who's going to start with that?
Okay, can I start the response on that from,
sure.
And then I'm sure Liz can pick up on some detail. We are continuing to lobby government for funding around special education needs. It is a national issue. It's not specific to Surrey. We are not the only authority that has overspent on the budget. I recognise what Chris is saying about we're expected to do more with less. And one of the key ways of doing this, I mean, bear in mind the Department of Education have got restrictions on school budgets where we can't put additional money into the direct schools grant block. And that's why Rachel was saying we have to balance the books through the reserves. So we do continue to lobby. As I've said, 90% of local authorities are in very similar position to us. And I think the key thing that we're doing is looking at maintaining our own specialist settings. And if you look at the average unit costs, the non-maintained and independent sector, the average is probably about £52,000 per placement. It doesn't necessarily guarantee a better outcome for those children. And if we have them within our own maintained settings, the average cost is somewhere between £16,000 and £23,000. Now, bearing in mind that this is a demand-led service and we can't not provide for these education, health and care plans, we simply have to reduce the unit cost whilst guaranteeing the outcomes, and that's why we've got this capital investment programme. So I reject the idea that this is about cuts because there is increasing demand and we have overspent and we're balancing the books with those reserves and putting capital investment in, which is a no-brainer to reduce the ongoing revenue costs. So that's the biggest risk around delivering on this, I would say. And I don't know whether Liz wants to add to that.
So I think it would be good just to add something broadly, and then of course my colleague either Jackie Burke or Tina may want to come in and add something, because this is a directorate-wide sort of question, and of course you'll understand the planning principles. There'll be opportunities, of course, to think about that, but the course of action for every local authority is, of course, to use the funding that it has available to best effect every year. And we do that in a 5-year planning process in order to be able to make sure that we're building on the effectiveness of the way that we're using our resources to achieve the outcomes for our residents. And we are, in this case, very particularly building on the strategies that we already have in place. So this is not a response specifically just to the cost pressures and demands, but it is utilising the approaches that we've been talking about for some time now in terms of family resilience, a graduated response to meeting the needs of our learners, all of those important factors that we've been introducing over the last 2 years now will very much hold us in good stead in terms of our effectiveness, coupled together exactly with the elements that Julie has been talking about there in terms of our capital investment strategy and being able to drive forward better value for money and outcomes from our Closer to Home programme, both across corporate parenting and indeed in our school settings. So all of those things stack up. Yes, of course, across all public service, it's very testing to be able to continue to do that within the resources available, particularly within the demands of the pandemic. But we're using the resources that have come through the COVID grant funding and other things to be able to support us this year. And of course, we're looking towards next year, to see what funding is available there as well. So hopefully that goes some way to answering the question. But I'll just see whether, in terms of family resilience or corporate parenting, anybody else wants to just add to what I've said.
You wanted to?
Yes, just to really support what Liz has said in terms of family resilience and safeguarding and corporate parenting, in terms of the efficiencies we're trying to make to keep within our budget envelope, it's actually in line with what we think is best for children and what we set out in our initial strategy and vision was that children should be helped at the lowest level of need rather than problems mounting up to each statutory level. That they, if they become looked after, that they become looked after in Surrey. So some of our spend is on external placements for children outside of Surrey. So as Liz said, we're trying to move them closer to home. And one of our biggest pressures actually is in staffing, is having permanent staffing, and we know that's best for children to have permanent staffing. So we're really working very hard on a workforce strategy to try and bring that in line. So yeah, placements and workforce are our biggest spend in children's social care, and obviously my paper's coming next, but we have seen a big increase in work in the statutory sector, and we don't want to grow our workforce. We want to stop problems escalating so that we don't need such a big statutory workforce, and that's just better for children and families.
Thank you, Jackie. Tina, did you want to mention anything? You've put your camera on.
Just to expand on what Jackie said, in relation to placements, the key thing we'd like to do is to secure more foster carers for children in Surrey. And prior to COVID, we were doing very well in terms of recruiting additional foster carers. Obviously, COVID has made that more difficult. It hasn't ceased completely, but it's not moved with quite the same speed. But actually, that's the thing that will make the biggest difference, because ultimately we'd want all the children that can be living in families rather than in children's homes. And it would also mean that they'd be in Surrey. So it's the foster care recruitment, which is not dissimilar to staffing in terms of making a difference to the budget.
Thank you very much for those explanations. Can I turn now to Claire Curran, which I think she may have a linked question, and then Peter Martin, please.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Yes, again referring to the planned efficiencies and the slide that was presented to us. Looking at the profile of the efficiencies for the forthcoming year and tying that in with the RAG rating in the far right-hand side of individual areas, I note particularly the savings in the areas of the high needs block, in transport and in family resilience are all red rated. I also think that this table of planned efficiencies is probably not dissimilar to previous year's budgets, which we would have looked at and discussed. And given that these are areas which we've already highlighted as being under pressure, and areas where we already have overspends this year, especially given COVID, can I ask, please, what is the level of confidence in the achievability of these savings?
And Pete Martin, please, for the second question.
Thank you, Chairman. My question was partly what Claire has just asked on the planned efficiencies, these very high efficiencies in the high needs block cost containment of 20 million this year and 53 million next year, which are red rated, are very considerable. My other question is to Mark. When he was saying he was confident that the 18.3 million gap for 2021-22 would be closed, does that still assume then that there is a further 5.9 million to be saved within the children's area, or are you able to close the gap without getting the 5.9 million additional from the children's area? And then finally, we still have a very high agency rate. I understand that we've got 25% of our social workers are still agency workers. This pushes costs up. Will we ever be able to close the gap and make sure that we don't rely so heavily on agency, which then must surely reduce our costs? Thank you.
Okay, who would like to start that?
Shall I start around the confidence level, and then perhaps we'll go to finance colleagues around the confidence around the gap, and then Jackie, I think about the agency. Would that be appropriate, Chair?
Thank you.
So in terms of the confidence level, we've tried to take a really robust approach to this of course, we're in the detailed planning of each of the delivery of those savings now, and I think the RAG rating in part just indicates the scale of the saving, but each one of those will have robust plans sitting underneath them. If I can just turn to the sort of the high needs block challenges for a moment. What we're really reliant upon, though, in terms of making sure we achieve each of those savings, is a systemic response. So it's not just within the local authority's control. Of course, it is working with partners and affecting every individual school and wanting to work with us on that. And, of course, the corporate support to deliver things like the changes that we require through expansion of our school places, and the land and property team, for example, are working really hard with us on that. So the RAG ratings reflect the complexity. They do reflect the need to work with others, and just at this point in sort of heading towards the year, feel pragmatic. But we do anticipate that they will start to shift, and of course individual projects sitting under very large banners of that heading are indeed, some of them are green and some of them are amber, so they're not all red, but it feels important just to sort of share the scale of the challenge. We've pulled together a group from our school community that are now leading forward with us on some really important work around inclusion, in terms of making sure that for September 2021 every child possible can have their needs met within a mainstream environment or a maintained school environment if it's a special school place that's needed. And so again, just knowing that collective energy is there will help us to meet some of these challenges. And indeed, we're also doing work with our health colleagues and social care colleagues, both in children's and adults. So I'm quite sure that there'll be important points for update as we move forward, but there is a very large scale programme and collective effort sort of sitting behind deliverability. That's true too across into corporate parenting and family resilience, our social care teams, and when Jackie comes on to talking about the agency placements, she may well want to elaborate further on some of those aspects as well. So Rachel, is it appropriate to hand over to you to talk about the gap at that point and how we might go about closing that gap, that 5.9?
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark, if you wanted to come in at all, feel free. So the 18.3 million that is the council-wide gap at the moment, Mark during his presentation was explaining that we've had the spending review we had at the end of November, which showed the high-level picture for what local government finance is likely to see. What we don't know is the specifics for Surrey, but from that high-level view, we feel confident that we'll be able to get sufficient funding to be able to close the gap, so that we don't need to go back to directorates to find any further efficiencies. Mark, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Thank you, Rachel. That does reassure me. I did hear it correctly.
Okay, good.
Okay, sorry, I'm just seeing different things on my screen at the moment. Okay, so Mark, you didn't want to add anything?
No, thank you, Chair. I think Rachel put it better than I could have.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got two more questioners at the moment. We've got Richard Walsh and Liz Bowes. Richard, I think your questions may have already been highlighted or answered, but if you'd like to add anything else.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted a little more detail, or an example of a detail, or on these planning efficiencies. Can I refer you to page 42, the second bullet point down? Here is an example. We have send expenditure, increases in demand in EHCPs, significantly outstrips funding increases in this area. So additional management action is required to try and limit the impact. And my question is, what additional management action, if you were the manager, would you take to achieve this? what sort of, so a little more detail, not just generalising, but thinking, well, actually, I'm the manager presented with this problem. How would I achieve it so that I know whether or not you've got a grip of what it's all about? So, thank you.
Liz, do you want to take that first? Sorry, Liz Mills, do you want to take that first before I bring in Liz Bowes? Because I think we might be changing tack a bit then.
Yes, absolutely. So our wider work has been, as you know, very much seated in meeting needs earlier and being able to see a reduction in the call for statutory plans and that to come in line with the benchmark. So, we've seen some success around that. We've seen in the last 9 to 12 months, so predating COVID, reductions in requests for statutory plans over that period. And it's also accelerated outside of the experiences seen by other local authorities. And so that tells us something about whether the indications around our management actions in resolving issues early. An example of that might be the emotional literacy support assistance that we are putting into schools. We've had a very big expansion of that programme to support the emotional needs of young people, and that has been very well received by schools, and parents are also reporting back to us how valuable that's been for children and young people. Another might be the expansion of the pathways for employment. So we saw that happen from this September, October time for a lot of our post-16 students. And we are anticipating to double the number of placements on those schemes as we come into September 2021. So we've done a lot of work working with parents and the young people themselves to help them understand what choices are available to them. And indeed, we're working with Surrey Choices in terms of that support and our adult social care colleagues integral to that. And then lastly, perhaps just thinking about those young people that might need to access alternative provision. So where their needs aren't being able to be met in school, again, those are costs that would normally be met by the high needs block, and we have seen an expansion of need in that area. So we're working with school colleagues to think about how to set up hubs of short-term learning and outreach support to help children and young people perhaps with anxiety who are finding it difficult to access school at the moment, and to do that in a really effective way. So introducing, for example, our outdoor learning provision there into something, so connecting to services there and making sure that we're making best use of all the resources we have available. So those are just some illustrations of some of the sort of direct things that we're doing to try and take those management actions.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chairman, for that. And we'll see in the next 6 months to a year how successful that has become. The one unknown factor is the demand, of course, and that keeps increasing. There's very little we can do about that. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Liz Bowes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. First of all, a big thank you to officers for explaining regarding the impact of COVID in the draft budget. I think you've sort of covered that area quite comprehensively. The area I would like to ask is that other rather important matter affecting the UK currently, which is our future relationship with the European Union. And I wonder if officers could give us some guidance as to whether they feel that may affect the draft budget and our medium-term financial strategy, or it may not. Thank you very much.
Okay, who would like to take that, Liz? Thank you.
I wonder if Jackie wants to come in on that one first, perhaps around aspects of social care, and then I'm happy to follow up on the education piece.
Okay, and Mark, you've put your camera on, so does that mean that you wish to speak?
Yes, it was just to say that the impact of leaving the European Union was one of the economic and legislative factors that we brought into the core planning assumptions under the PESL framework, and so where there is a potential financial impact of leaving the European Union across the council, scenarios around that were planned. However, when that was done back in November, and indeed still we still don't know exactly what our relationship will be with the European Union post the 1st of January, and so that they probably bear revisiting. But the impact was definitely planned in there, and the impact comes from a corporate perspective, the impact on inflation, on prices, and the availability of staff and services, and from a legislative basis that some of the regulatory frameworks in which we operate might change. So they were factored in at a corporate level. I think clarity on the future relationship will obviously be a guiding impact on the actual impact of that.
Thank you. And Jackie, do you want to comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the children's social care aspect of Brexit, clearly our biggest worry is about staffing. And that's probably about the third time I've spoken for about 3 minutes. It's probably about the third time I've mentioned staffing. It's absolutely critical to us. So with our existing workforce, we did an exercise with unions earlier on this year to ensure that staff who are from the EU have the right paperwork in place to continue working for us. And we will be just in a refresh of that now. The other big issue for us is, of course, in terms of our children's homes and being able to get supplies, and we've got contingency planning for that as well. So, and then finally, it's about our children who are looked after to make sure that they have the right status. So we've already done all of that work, and we've looked at some of our children who are not looked after but are working with us, so that we can assist families to make sure that they have the right paperwork in place going forward. So we don't see any significant impact. Our worry is about staffing, but we think we've got that in hand.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Jackie. Claire, you've got your hand up. Claire Curran.
Yes, I do, Chairman. Thank you. Just going back in retrospect and for completeness, in respect to Liz Mills' response to Richard Walsh's question, I need to report that I have a non-pecuniary interest in that I am a non-executive director of Surrey Choices, to which she referred. It is a non-remunerated position. I didn't realise that this was relevant to this particular item at the beginning of the meeting. Otherwise, I would have obviously reported it then. I'm sorry.
It's okay, no worries. You didn't know it was going to be mentioned, so that's fine. You didn't have a crystal ball, Claire, so that's fine. And we will note that interest, which is non-prejudicial. Thank you very much for that. Now, I have no further questions, and so what I'm proposing to deal with in the way of recommendations. We know that in January 2021, a single report from all select committees is going to be submitted to the Cabinet. And at the same time, the Cabinet is to agree the draft budget and the medium-term financial plan. So the Select Committee may make recommendations to contribute to that report and must provide a conclusion linking to the budget scrutiny objectives that we've just been through. So what I'm proposing is that that we agree wording for inclusion in the report regarding the draft budget and medium-term scrutiny, medium-term financial strategy, which is going to be prepared jointly by the 4 select committees. The chairman, myself, and my 2 vice chairmen will be meeting. In fact, we're meeting tomorrow to agree some wording, which we can then circulate to all members for inclusion in that report, rather than deal with a final recommendation at this point. Could I ask for your agreement that we deal with the recommendation in relation to this budget in that way, and we can take into account all the contributions that have been made, possibly concerns, so that we can not just have a couple of words in a recommendation, but be a bit more comprehensive in the report for that later meeting. Are you content with that approach?
Yeah, agreed.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Agreed.
Thank you all very much indeed. We've been going nearly 2 hours now, so I'm going to suggest we've got the final item and then the forward plan. I would really like to spend a bit of time on the improvement update. I'm just suggesting a 5-minute comfort break to recommence at 12 o'clock. I think we all perhaps need that. So I don't know if you want to stop the recording and restart it. I don't know how this works, but I do think a 5-minute break from the screen would be very welcome by all. So I'll see you all again at 12 o'clock. Can you confirm the recording has started? Thank you very much indeed. So the webcast is now live again, and thank you all for your patience. So now we're turning to item 8 of the agenda, Children's Improvement Update. And let me just make sure I've got all my relevant papers in front of me. Before I introduce, there will be, we are expecting a presentation, and before I do that, I really would just like to say a huge thank you to all our social workers, to all the team, senior management team, our cabinet members. There's a real credit that should be given to everybody who's continued to work during this unprecedented time for continuing to launch the initiatives that the transformation programme had started. And I just really think that it is, you've done a mammoth task. You must be all exhausted, and I really do hope that you switch off if you have time over the Christmas period. I know there will be those that will not be able to do that, but if you can, please switch off your phone. Please switch off and spend time with your family if you're able to do so. And I just really want to say a huge, huge, huge thank you. So we do have some witnesses here. We've got Mary again. We've got Jackie Burke again. Tina, I think, will still be with us. And have we got Mark or Joe Watkins here?
Yeah, Mark's here. Mark
Mapston. Thank you very much indeed. So over to you for presentation, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you so much for those kind words. Stole my thunder really, because the context of this year has been absolutely astonishing. And as you can see from having read the report, we've seen an increase in workload across the piece this year. And that is largely because of the pandemic. I have to say, when we went into lockdown at the end of March, as a leadership team, we braced ourselves because we felt so anxious about the potential impact this would have on our improvement. So as I said, we have seen a great increase in workload across the piece. Part of the context of how we're working is our social workers aren't in the office as the way they would have done. So they're often working from home. They are spending some time in the office, but not very much. And what that means actually is that there's less support from colleagues on a daily basis. There's less ability to be able to nudge practice in the way that one would, because once upon a time a social worker would bomb back to the office after a visit, or a practitioner would bomb back to the office after a visit, and they would talk to someone who would help them think about it differently. So those opportunities aren't there. We've created different opportunities online, but of course we all know that's not quite the same. Just in summary, in terms of the impact of the increase in workload, our November performance and October performance as a service showed that we have borne up astonishingly well to the demands that have been made of us. So, for example, in our assessment services, we saw a really big increase in work, up to 30%, but our timeliness hasn't decreased. In the front door, in the C-SPA, we have seen a huge increase in demand there, and we are still managing to get all of our work out in a really timely manner. So getting help to children isn't being delayed. So in terms of the activity we have undertaken with regard to our improvement, you'll see there's an exhaustive list, which some of it is about capital development, which is about our children's homes, and our children's single point of access. We are embarking on merging that with the learners' single point of access so that children and young people get a more rounded response. But in the C-SPA throughout the pandemic, they've taken on the vulnerable calls to families in addition to the increased workload. And they've created a wellbeing hub, and they've produced parenting guides, and they've also pulled some really important pieces of work together to help families where they are in huge financial difficulties. As we know, that's a really big issue, byproduct of the pandemic is families in poverty. So we've pulled together some really good work on that. And also in terms of our improvement, we changed how we ran our emergency duty team. We have support from SABP, from our CAMS provider. We've put youth workers and family group conference workers. We've had more social work presence on the EDT. And what we have done is we've evaluated the impact of that, which what it has meant is that we have seen fewer children coming into care by EDT. It doesn't mean to say that we've had fewer children coming into care per se, but what we know is if they come in a more planned way with the day teams, it's a calmer experience. As a child, if you're coming into care, you'll remember that day for the rest of your life. So if it happens in the daytime, it's more planned. And financially, we've got more of the team stood up, so we're able to make better choices in a more calm way. So there's more likelihood that those placements will hold. So we've evaluated the impact of C-SPA, and actually we've just agreed a business case to continue our model of working. So we have been dispatching youth workers at weekends if families have been, say, in a point of breakdown, and we have seen that's made a tremendous difference. We've had a lot of really positive feedback from residents who've used that. And in terms of any unaccompanied asylum seekers who land evenings and weekends, we've now got social workers to dispatch to see them to do that initial eyes-on assessment as well. Tina has already mentioned no wrong door, so I'm motoring with that. In terms of our early help, you will remember from the Ofsted inspection in 2018, they were critical of the early help offer. There was a lot happening, but it wasn't focused and it wasn't really making a difference, and it certainly wasn't helping us at the front door. In the last few months, we've done some tremendous work with the voluntary faith and community sector. We've had a number of webinars with them about how we can support each other to help families early. And we've launched our Helping Families Early strategy. And we followed the launch of the Helping Families Early strategy in November with each quadrant, each assistant director in each of the quadrants. Every other month, they are holding a family resilience network in those quads, and that comprises of schools, health visitors, we have fire and rescue, we have a voluntary faith and community sector of our practitioners. And again, that's with the express mission of helping families earlier and supporting and challenging each other to do that. We've also had the benefit of some transformation funding, and we're looking at how we can enhance our digital help for families early, and we will have a minimum viable product to trial in January. We've done a lot of user research, so we've engaged a number of stakeholders from across our partnership, but more importantly, we've engaged with a number of parents to help us think, when you're looking for help early, what might that look like? So we feel like we've made some significant strides in that area, and we think we will be seeing the impact of that in the next 3 to 6 months. Our workforce, as I've mentioned, this might be the fourth time, is really critical to us, and we have really struggled to with our turnover and with our agency rates. And we were very grateful to members for approving an enhanced attraction salary offer. So we've got it up to £6,000 recruitment and retention for qualified social workers when they come and join us, and for agreeing a retention payment. We're not looking at that in isolation. We, again, through transformation, we've got a whole programme on workforce that looks at what the employee experience is. We've got a lot of focus groups with our staff. We're benchmarking ourselves nationally. We are looking at all of the career pathways, what the learning development offer is, and what makes people stay. So we've got a huge piece of work around that. And most importantly, we've gone out to advert again with our refreshed offer. We've refreshed all our websites. You will also be aware that the youth centre consultation has ended, and we are just in the process of mobilising what that might look like, as some youth centres will be going live with their new universal offer. We had 65 different organisations approached us to take over leadership of those centres, and we've got a plan for all but one. Our family safeguarding, our adolescent safeguarding adolescents work, we are still part of the national rollout of family safeguarding. We've onboarded nearly all of our alternatively qualified practitioners. For those of you on the call, we have adult mental health workers, probation workers, and substance misuse workers to help us work with families around domestic abuse, substance misuse, and adult mental health. We've onboarded the majority of those through lockdown, so you can imagine that we haven't been able to fly in the way we would if we'd all been in the office, but they are making an impact. And with both family safeguarding and the adolescent safeguarding, we have been having practitioner-led webinars whereby the practitioners are showcasing the work that they're doing and they're questioning each other. So I find them delightful, I have to say, to have social workers and practitioners talk about the big difference they're making to families. But in terms of our improvement, that's been so important for us to be able to do that. You will also see that in terms of Mockingbird, we've launched another hub, and we've just completed our end-to-end review of our LCS system, which again was highly criticised in the Ofsted report. And we are in the process of implementing the I system, the early years something system, and education system, which will enable us to have a single view of a child. And we're also working on better financial modelling as well through that. We've had a particular focus on our children with disabilities. That's now managed by the Assistant Director in the North East. And following throughout, we call them mocksteads, that's not the word to call them, but we have a series of peer reviews. You'll see from the paper we've had a number of opportunities to really scrutinise our work, not least having carried out almost 600 audits this year. And we've had a real focus in the last couple of months over children with disabilities following one of our deep dives internally. So, and in that particular area, we've aimed to look at 402 children who are open to us. In the last month, we've looked at 227 of those, and we've got a level of confidence that we didn't have before about the quality of the work that's being carried out there, but we've still got work to do. I'm going to pause because I could talk for a lot about this, and I'm sure colleagues have read the report. So you can see the activity. You've got the audit reports, which show, in terms of quality, I guess before I do finish, what I would say, I was just reading the October audit report, and the area that we had the most concern about was our disabled children's team. And to say they have actually stepped up enormously this year. They've really risen to this challenge. But in terms of the inadequates in the round of audits in October, there were 12 in total, and 8 of those were in the disabled children's service. So in terms of quadrants, I think we're getting a bit more traction on that, and the majority of work requires improvement, and you can see that more are becoming good, but it does fluctuate. So I would say that I'm very, very happy that we haven't slid back in the pandemic, which was my absolute worry. I'm really in awe with the practitioners who have kept up performance to such a high standard. But in terms of consistently good quality for children, I accept we still have a way to go.
Thank you very much. Mary, did you want to come in briefly, or you are happy for questions?
Happy for questions, I think, Kay, apart from just to say thank you. And as everyone can see, we haven't let the grass grow under our feet in any way, but everyone's kept moving forward, which has been fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the first question is from Leslie Steeds.
Thank you, Chairman. I know that Jackie and Tina have already touched on this, but what I'm concerned about is how we are adequately resourced to meet this increased demand, Jackie, and what risks would you say we should be aware of as a committee? And following on from that, the social workers, what wellbeing support is available to staff, and how do we provide that and fund it? Thank you.
So I take that. So I'll start with wellbeing. I should have wrote those all down, Leslie, as you were speaking. So wellbeing, we corporately, we have put on quite a big wellbeing offer. So, and in terms of children's social care as well, children's services, we had mindfulness training, there's coaching, we've done stuff with Surrey Outdoor Learning so that teams can go there and do some team building. There is coaching that is available, so you can join a kind of corporate coaching team if you just want to go and get some assistance and some different ideas about how to manage, as well as you can have a bespoke kind of coach for your team as well. The counselling and wellbeing support to all of our practitioners has been extended, to everyone in Surrey County Council has been extended, as well as things like bereavement navigators. We've had a particular focus on domestic abuse because we're aware that some of our practitioners and managers might be living in abusive situations, so we've put up support for that as well. And we, as leaders of the service, are always very vocal, and we put out lots of internal comms about look after yourself, look after each other, it's okay not to be okay. And we're particularly trying to focus at the moment on extended working days. You yourselves will know you end up in back-to-back meetings, and we're really trying to focus our staff on making sure they get some time for themselves. So we've been doing some fun things as well. So we had a pantomime for our staff last week, and which was, again, just a gesture of lightheartedness and silliness, to just give people an hour just to focus on something daft. And we also had our staff awards ceremony last week, which was absolutely tremendous. So, and your other question was about capacity. So we've done some very sophisticated modelling of capacity, looking at what's coming in through the front door and then the trickle through into the rest of the system, with a view to looking at how we may support that. What we don't want is this level of statutory support to have to continue for families, because we know it's far better for families if we catch them early, if we help them early. But what we also know is that during the pandemic, it has been very difficult for some of those very ordinary things that make a difference to families, like going to a singing group with your infant child. You know, those venues aren't open, and that with the kind of tinderbox effect of not being able to have your normal support is having a tremendous impact on families. So we are looking at how we can resource the blip, but notwithstanding the fact it's very difficult for us to attract social workers. They're nationally quite a scarce commodity. So we have been working really closely with our voluntary facing community sector, who have been tremendous to help us think of ways that we can do things differently. And we've had, so part of that is looking at our Helping Families Early. The launch of that, we had a number of voluntary sector showcasing what they can do in the community to help. And what we're also doing is we are helping our practitioners when they stepping things down from a statutory level. We've got, we call them our little squad around the quad. So we've got a number of practitioners in the Early Help Hub who are going to the quadrants to help them think about, does this family's needs still need to be met at statutory level? These are the kind of things in the community we can help make introductions to that. So we know that if we step families out of statutory services in a kind and thoughtful way with support around them to help them capitalise on the changes they've made, they're less likely to come back. But the resourcing is a challenge, you know, to mention staffing yet again, it is probably one of our greatest challenges, which is, you know, why we've got a bespoke work stream with 6 different aspects to it to really try and give us a heads up on the competition around us. We are surrounded by good or outstanding authorities by and large, with the exception of about one. So, you know, it's a tall ask to get people to come and work for us. But once they do, we're finding that they're quite liking it. But we've got more work to do.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mary, did you want to add into that?
Thank you. Jackie got to staffing again at the end. As she said, it is our continual theme. And as lead member, one of my big concerns is the pressure on staff of increased caseloads, which will inevitably, or has already started happening in some areas of the service. But as described in Jackie's explanation about what's been happening, there's been a huge focus on recruitment and retention, and the PPDC did support a new package, and we hope to see the benefits of that kicking in January at the very latest, January, February. We should be able to see what that has done for us. But as Jackie has said, there's a national shortage of social workers. So every time we've had the opportunity to meet with MPs, you'll know Kay last week, one came up with 5 of our Surrey MPs asking that they should put pressure on the government to do more to make the social work a more attractive career option for people. And it's something that needs tackling nationally, because we're putting huge effort behind it locally, but we're essentially all of the local authorities poaching from each other, which is not a healthy situation to be in. On a much brighter note, I was presenting some awards at the awards ceremony, and amongst those were the awards for our cohort of newly qualified social workers, the ones that we've trained in-house, our ASYE year people, lots of bright young things coming into to this as a career. Not all so young, I have to say, but bright anyway. And we really welcome them with open arms, and we are growing our own, and that's very, very positive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I'm going to take questions now in twos again. So we've got Claire Curran and then Peter Martin. Claire.
Thank you, Chairman. So I was really encouraged to read this report and see that there's been progress in so many areas and clear signs of improvement. And I hope it's all right, Chairman, if I ask 3 sort of sub-questions. My first question is about the work that we're doing with Essex County Council as the improvement partner. And really, does Essex County, I don't think Essex uses the family safeguarding model. So I was I was quite interested in that aspect, because obviously that's a very important area of improvement for us. The second question I had was about looking in detail at the performance indicators. It was about the increasing level of re-referrals and whether that should be taken as an indicator of the quality of practice, and if you were particularly concerned about that. And the third area, linking across the two and particularly into the report about the audits, it's really good to see that now up to 20% of practice is being classed as good, but you do mention some of the inadequate practice, and although the detailed figures aren't in there to examine, I noticed the comments around youth offending, about young people who are missing or at risk of CSE, which might indicate that they are older children, maybe teenagers. And given what we've talked about already with No Wrong Door, the work that you comment on with EDT and your safeguarding adolescents, is that area of work a specific priority area for improvement?
Peter, please forgive me, but I think that there are 3 questions in there that I think need to be addressed before we go on to yours. So apologies, Peter, I will come back to you, but as Claire asked virtually 3 questions there, I think the officers should deal with those first. Okay. Thank you.
So I'll start off with the ethics with the partners in practice. So after Dave died, the DFE gave us the opportunity of having Essex as a partner in practice, particularly as a way of supporting us while we're waiting for our new DCS, Rachel Wardell, who's I think on the meeting today, to join us. So how we used them, they did a series of stock takes, and which was really helpful, and we have pinched their idea and embellished it to run those in-house ourselves. So it was a really incredibly useful exercise. It kind of didn't tell us anything we didn't know, but it was just really helpful to hear, to see, because we went and visited them to see how they did it. So it was really helpful to see how they took a systems look at performance management, and so taking their ideas on board with the stuff that we already were starting to think, we need to do this and this next. It's been really helpful. And Rachel just joined us last week as DCS, so we will be no doubt talking with Rachel and with Essex about what next in terms of how we use them. Your point about family safeguarding is pretty well made, but in terms of our comparison with other authorities, we have started our external evaluation of family safeguarding already, and I and the more operational leads for family safeguarding are part of the national network of authorities that have been rolling this out. So again, that's been incredibly helpful being part of this. So we kind of feel that we're possibly getting the best of both worlds. If it's okay if I move on to re-referrals, we would always be worried about a re-referral. It's never something we're ever happy about. I'd say a couple of things. One is about life cycle, is that sometimes in a family's life cycle, something different might happen, and families who are supported by us often tend to be the least resilient of families in the community. So if some really challenging, like adolescence can be one, puberty can be one, that can really knock parents off course. So we would always expect some level of re-referral. The other issue for us at the moment is in regards to the pandemic. As I've said, a number of a number of places where families would have got support when they'd stopped working with us haven't been working in the same way. And of course, families aren't able to access their own family and friends in the way they did. So I think in terms of some of the re-referrals, yes, that will be pandemic related. Of course, we look at that data in terms of which teams they're coming from and which services. So it does help us shine a light on we just got to be really careful that our practitioners aren't just being single issue led, that's dealt with, tick, off you go. I mentioned earlier about the importance of step down. Some of the things that make the greatest difference to some of the families we work with are the smallest community projects, community gardening projects. So we are really extending our practitioners' understanding of what else is available. And one of our mantras is, as soon as a family starts working with you, you've got to think about them ending working with you, and they've got to leave the service in a better shape. So what support would you need to put around them? So, for example, we are increasing use of family network meetings in our assessment service, so that it's just, the social worker not just swooping in, looking at a problem and going out. The social worker is inviting people in the family network to help them think about how to prevent things from escalating and how to support the family. So we will always be worried about re-referrals. There will always be some referrals, and I think the pandemic's had an issue, but yes, our practice always needs to improve. So the next question was about audit and focusing on our young people. So as you will be aware, our youth offending service was graded as inadequate last year. We've done a tremendous amount of work in that area of the world, and we are significantly more confident in the skills of those practitioners and the outcomes for those young people than we were a year ago. As is the Youth Justice Board has got a high degree of confidence in the improvement work we've done in that domain. In terms of adolescence, it's absolutely a priority. It's a priority for the Safeguarding Partnership, and it's a huge priority for us. So we've had a number of, so as you know, we have our own targeted in-house youth support team, which is below statutory level, as well as we've got our safeguarding adolescent teams. And the youth justice work, the youth offending work is held in that particular part of the world. And of course, we've got No Wrong Door coming in. So as part of our absolute commitment to getting this right, we've increased. We've got a woman called Garby Shaper, who's a very experienced and qualified family therapist, as well as she's a qualified social worker and operates at a fairly senior level in some roles she's undertaken. So she is leading in terms of the practice development in that area. We had a big conference on Friday, which was for our internal staff around safeguarding adolescents, and we had Colleen Furman, who is an absolutely renowned academic in this area, coming and talking to us about that. So we are moving ahead with the strategy, we're moving ahead with our practice improvement, and we are absolutely dependent on excellent partnership work, particularly with this cohort, because what we know is very often people think it's easier, just get these kids in care, get them away where they're going to be safe, but actually we need to make Surrey safe for these children to live and grow up in, because if we take them away and they end up in Birmingham, they're dislocated from their family, from their education, from their friends, and it's absolutely awful for them. So clearly, in terms of having confidence as a partnership, that's our police, our schools, our districts and boroughs, about really gripping our adolescents and taking responsibility for them together. That's just the absolute best thing we can do. So yes, we have got a big focus on it.
Thank you very much. I do think, I know, Claire, did you want to come back on that? Or I'm actually wanting to raise an issue in relation to the youth offending service review that appears on page 87 and Annex 3 in relation to the quality, obviously, of the service, and 43% of children receiving an inadequate service. I think this is something that the committee needs to keep an eye on, and I'm possibly suggesting that a piece of work be brought back to this committee, and it can go onto our forward plan, possibly in the next summer.
Okay.
Our March agenda is already very, very busy, and I think that it's probably full. It's too soon, obviously, in the January meeting. So I think in the summer, I would like to think that we could see some progress. You've said that there's progress. We need to see it, and we need to see what else is happening within that service, particularly following the last Ofsted. So, and the last review. So I think this is something that I am quite concerned about. I used to sit on the Youth Justice Board. I know how we used to be, and I want us to be as good as we were. And I don't quite know what went wrong in the service, but that's history. We're now progressing forward. But I think strategy is needed in this area.
Yeah, so if I can, just by way of context to the information in this pack, some of those children who were audited were the cohort of children who were audited as part of the inadequate inspection. So we, in terms of our quality assurance, the targeted youth support hadn't, which is where the majority of our youth offending work happens, they hadn't been included in the audit cycle. They are now included in the audit cycle, and all of their performances on Tableau. We'd be delighted actually to come back to members here and showcase the huge improvements that happened to the youth offending service. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I need to go back to, so Peter Martin, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I also congratulate the team on the tremendous improvement that's been made over the last 2 or 3 years. It's tremendous, and I know how difficult it is. I had also a question on re-referrals, which has just been answered. Can I come back, please, to the agency rate? When I first joined this committee, more than 15 years ago, the very first item on the agenda was the level of agency rates amongst our social workers. All through the time when I was the children's portfolio holder, and all through the time when I chaired improvement boards, we never, ever stopped talking about the high level of agency rates. Are there some benchmark counties like Kent or Essex or others, Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire, around? We all have this problem being too close to London. Are they doing better than us? And if so, why? I mean, I know you've just put in the recruitment package and the retention package, but isn't that just doing what the others are doing? You know, it does seem that we have to run to stand still. Indeed, running is not sufficient. We need to sprint like mad to stand still. Is this going to be any different? I mean, I know we've spoken about it, so don't go on too much, but I just have this huge concern that it's never going to go away. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's a top priority for us, and it is, I think any authority you would go in, they would more or less be talking about this kind of stuff, but we did do quite a lot of benchmarking with other authorities, and there is a correlation between turnover and agency rate and inadequate authorities. So the good or outstanding authorities tend to have the more stable staff group, and unfortunately Surrey hasn't been in that position for many years of being able to be proud of that level of services. So I won't rehash what I said earlier, but we've got an absolute focus on this. We've got a transformation programme on it, and we are galloping.
Thank you very much. Richard Walsh next, please. And after that, Liz Bowes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I have a comment and then a quick question. The comment is that the universal youth work that you've put into place, I think is absolutely excellent. And it's something that I'm really appreciating within my area, and that the people who want to operate and run with our universal youth offer are really pleased about it. And I think it's very positive, the way that we're utilising the buildings and everything else. So basically, I just want to say thank you very much. Please continue that. Really great news. And I think it's really going to benefit the youth in my area. The question is that I note that you've appointed 40 newly qualified social workers. You've, though, indicated that nationwide we're short of social workers. The impression I get then is that there are newly qualified social workers, in a sense, coming off the, sorry to put it crudely, but the production line or the university degrees or whatever. Would you like to have been able to appoint 80 or 60 new social workers? In other words, are there enough? So if I was a governor minister, would I be saying, gosh, we've got to go and find some extra university places and increase the number to satisfy our social work requirement? Or is it that 40 is sufficient in that sense? There are enough new social workers being produced to come through. So thank you.
That's a really, really good question. In terms of us having 40, I think the impact of having more, I mean, we could have gone in for 80. The impact of having more is in their first year of practice, their number of children they're allowed to work with is significantly less than that of someone who's a more experienced social worker. So every newly qualified social worker has quite an impact on the team. Because of COVID at the moment, so can you imagine you've just finished university, you've got your first social work job, you're really excited about it, and you can't go and sit next to your teammates and hear how they're managing kind of really challenging phone calls or how they come and debrief. So what we're recognising this year is it's going to take us longer to get them up to speed. So we have retained some backfill in terms of locum staff, because we don't want to put any pressure on our newly qualified social workers to up their caseloads too quickly. We don't want them to be scared and run off. And also in any team that you have, you've got to have a balance of the practice wisdom as well as, you know, the energy and enthusiasm of newly qualified social workers. You can't, you know, if you could bottle it, you would. But you need to have a balance. So I think we were very measured in terms of taking 40. We thought that was possibly at 10 per quadrant. We thought that was as much as we could probably manage at this particular point with some additional backfill. Yes. So are there enough social workers? I think the issue is how long people stay in frontline practice. So I haven't seen any recent research on this, but there was some about 6 years ago, which was saying it was 5 to 7 years was kind of the maximum. So I guess it's about how do you create the conditions whereby it's fantastic to be doing frontline practice and it's fantastic to want to keep on doing that. And I think that's the bigger question, and that leads to our recruitment, our retention per se. But I think that's a challenge for most social workers. They kind of feel they've had enough of frontline after 5 to 7 years.
Thank you. Director has put her hand up. Would you like to make a contribution to this?
If I may, yes. I mean, I would like to start by endorsing everything that Jackie has just said about both the benefits that newly qualified social workers bring, but also the challenge they represent in kind of managing caseloads within the service. And where that leads us to really is thinking about the quality of our service as a place where social workers want to stay, and what our retention looks like. So two things there. One is that where social workers continue to have a kind of 5 to 7 year willingness to stay in frontline practice, then our aim should be to keep those social workers for 5 to 7 years, and that is by offering them a great environment in which to do social work and good career progression. But just imagine the difference that it makes if instead of 5 to 7 years, we're talking about 7 to 10 years. And so the other thing is to be a place where people can enjoy a social work career that will last a full 10 years. And Surrey's got the size and scale that makes it possible. So you could live here and work here and not necessarily find yourself, in the same neighbourhood as the families that you're working with, which can sometimes be challenging for social workers. You can get variation on the patch. You can work in different quadrants, and that just the size of the organisation means there are opportunities for progression through management, but also potentially through specialising in particular areas of social work. So I think obviously the focus of our ambition for the service is on what we do to support children and families and improve their lives. But if you like, a second order ambition for the service is for it to be a place where social workers want to come and want to stay.
Thank you very much for that. Can I move now to Liz Post, please?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My concerns are, well, first of all, thank you for Councillor Curran for kindly asking the questions regarding the audit concerns, because obviously I think those were important to highlight. But we are a scrutiny committee, and it leaves me with the question that I think it was 2017 when we were judged inadequate for children's services, and now it's 2021 just round the corner. So my question is, do you expect frontline social work practice to be of satisfactory standard by the time Ofsted visits inspects our children's services in 2021? Really, I have to ask, is this good enough? We've had aspects which for over 3 years are inadequate. And I think a timeline, and we've listened to these comments for many years, and I suppose often, we accept them, but I would just like to have a bit more on that commitment and where we are as regards, the potential view of the grading when we get inspected again. Thank you.
Okay, Jackie.
So in terms of our improvement, it was 2018 when there was the last Ofsted inspection, and just kind of by way of comparing where we are now to where we were then, when we introduced the audit framework, the majority of audits had to be moderated. They were moderated down, and what that told us was that people in the system did not know what good practice looked like. So we've now got a tolerance rate of 10% moderation, and I think it was last month we were just under 10%. So what that tells us is that our managers in the system now have a far better understanding of what good practice looks like, and they're more able to call it, describe it. The quality of our audits has improved in terms of how people are able to articulate and present their work. So there has been significant improvements, not only in the system in which our practitioners are working, their attention to their commitment to families to having a timely response is unrecognisable for what it was in 2018. In any authority, you will not have blanket 100% outstanding or good audits. You will always get some pockets. So we are targeting our efforts on pockets, as I said, in terms of this month, the last month's set of audits, which actually you don't have, but I was looking at them before. So 12 out of 70 were inadequate, and 8 of those were in our children with disabilities service. And we've recognised that, and so we put in some really big additional support there. So we've made a commitment to review 402 cases in children with disabilities since August. We've reviewed 227, and having consulted with the practitioners about what makes a difference for them, the quality assurance service is going to embed themselves with those practitioners and sit alongside them and really help them in the moment when they're doing their analysis. So again, that's going to be a tremendous help. So it's a very dangerous thing to call out what you think your grading would be when Ofsted come to visit. So I'm going to shy away from that. I'm not going to call it.
I'm sorry. May I interject?
Yeah.
Good practice and good management would suggest that you have a rough idea. I mean, obviously, you know, we cannot predict what a team of inspectors will, but obviously, I would imagine that good leadership would be able to point to a rough idea rather than say you will not. So, can I hear?
I would be extremely disappointed if we were inadequate again. I'd be very surprised if we were inadequate again. So I'm not going to be pressed to give what I think grading is. I think that's very difficult for me to say. In a public meeting in particular. So I would say I'd be devastated and disappointed if we were inadequate. We have since the summer, we have worked with our leaders we've done a very rigorous self-assessment as a service, looking back to 2018, looking at what we've achieved and looking what we need to do to get to good. And we have a very detailed plan about what we're doing in the next 12 months to get us to that position, including how we engage our staff, how we theme that, how we get away just from kind of being compliance-led and having a real kind of child-focused, outcome-focused, relationship-focused approach to our improvement. So we've got a really good plan that we've got a lot of confidence in. We've done a really good self-assessment about what we think we still need to do to stretch us. And I would say if ever I was working in the children's services and I didn't stop wanting to improve, then I think I'd hang up my clogs.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Liz. I've got Mary and Tina both obviously wanting to interject in relation to this question. So can I call Mary first?
Thank you. I do agree that it's a bit unfair to try and press somebody to say that their service is good or outstanding in a public meeting. But we know that we're not inadequate because a year ago, our commissioner told us that we had made very significant and sustainable progress and did himself out of the job as a commissioner. And that would not have happened if we'd still been inadequate. So we know that a year ago, we were at the level of required improvement at least. And our audits are showing that, as has been pointed out, that we have the vast majority are good or requires improvement. What we do know is it's very, very difficult to get to good when you're dealing with a pandemic as well. We know there's always more work to do. We also know it took Essex 7 years to go from inadequate to outstanding. So that gives you a bit of perspective. Thank you.
Tina.
So it was just to build on what Mary said, really, in that Ofsted paused on their inspection regime from March when the first lockdown occurred. But from our 2018 inspection until January, we did have 4 monitoring visits, and they were talking in all of those about the improvements that we've made. So there was some judgment, although they don't give you a grading as such in a monitoring visit. They did comment on the improvements that we've made and were positive about the work that we were doing, albeit that paused in March, so we haven't had one since January. But you know that's the position from the 2018 inspection.
Yes, and sorry, just to jump in, and in terms of our confidence in our performance and quality assurance processes, Ofsted really likes ours, so much so that they invited our quality assurance service to do a presentation on what good QA looks like and good performance looks like to the South East and London Ofsted inspectors. So we've got a high degree of confidence in the framework we've got. We've got a high degree of confidence and trust in what we're seeing. And we've had external validation. And also just to point out that during the interregnum, while following Dave's death and before Rachel has arrived, we've been supported by, as a team, as leadership team, we've been supported by the chap who was our commissioner, who wrote the commissioner's report. We've all spent about 3 hours a week with him, so he's very close to what's happening, and he has confidence in us as a team.
Thank you very much. Chris, I know your hand is up, but I'm going to use Chairman's prerogative and just nip in one quick question before I end with your question.
Thank you.
and that is in relation on page 59 of the report, at paragraph 30.2. There were questions here about areas for improvement in frontline practice. And one of those areas, which I know happens throughout the council in all different services, is the feedback was that communication needed to improve. Now, how are you going to achieve that? Can you explain how you intend to allow for that communication to be better, and how you're going to encourage social workers and that feedback to happen, please?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. And in any local authority, in any serious case review, you will see communication as an issue. So it's not something that's unusual to Surrey, and it is critical to really good practice. So our big emphasis is on it's all about the relationship. Our practice model is about relationship-based practice. So I think in terms of our next stage, obviously communication is an essential component to good practice anywhere. Even to the most basic practice, good communication is important. And there's often a difference between what you think you've said and what someone thinks they've heard. So it's a really skillful action, communication in terms of safeguarding work. With our plans for our improvement work over the next 6 months, we have got a particular focus on relationship, and you cannot have good relationship without good communication. And so this is all the kind of subtle stuff. This is the nudge stuff. This is the, you can understand from an audit if it doesn't appear to be an audit trail, but this is the kind of stuff where we're sitting alongside practitioners and talking to them about, and so what did you do that and how did they understand that? So certainly in terms of as I was just describing with the support that's been put into children with disabilities, it is people sitting alongside them, and that's the stuff that makes a huge difference.
Thank you very much for that. So Chris, could you like to?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to endorse what Richard said about the youth service, and in my particular division, I'm working very hard with residents, and we have a charity set up to hopefully take it all over. But I noticed in paragraph 26.2 of the report, it referred to some education, training and childcare being permitted in youth centre buildings during the recent lockdown. I wondered why this was necessary and how the services were delivered. I'm being told that ALP will be in my youth centre virtually every day of the week. That rather restricts our use of that youth centre. So I just wonder why this was necessary, and how many are actually involved in here and how it's being delivered. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. On terms of the ALP, I think I'll have to come back to you on that. So I don't have that information to hand. So I'd be happy to have a conversation or a written response would be most helpful to that. During the pandemic, we weren't able to run the usual universal youth service anyway. We had to close the building. So what we did was we've got a food bank working from there, and there was another whereby we needed some space for street homeless people who tested positive for COVID. So we, because we weren't using that particular centre in the way that we would like to be because of COVID, we've offered up that space. So I think it's just been about us working with the LRF and working at what the priorities are in the moment. Going forward, I think clearly we will have some detailed conversations about what will and won't be used in the use of the building going forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. What I'll do is I'll write to Jackie and ask specifically about ALP and where it's happening and the costs involved. I'll do that today. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. And then, Chris, can you then share, or can the response be shared with all committee members?
Absolutely, absolutely.
We would all like to know that.
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Richard. I wasn't going to get any more questions, but
sorry, just 2 seconds, Madam Chairman, in the sense that I just want to reassure Chris that in my own youth centre at Shepperton, we have exactly the same situation. But I don't think it's in any way permanent, and it's there as a facility because of COVID. and to reassure him that I don't see that as a problem. So thank you.
All right, thanks for that. Let's see what's going forward.
I don't want to prolong this debate now. I think we've come to the end of the questioning that we're going to manage to achieve during the time available. So we need to turn now to the recommendation for the committee to agree. So Ben, if you could put that up on the screen. Okay, so we're suggesting that the Cabinet Member for Children, Young People, Families provide a further update in the July meeting, and that update includes any findings of any Ofsted monitoring and future thematic audits if we've had anything from Ofsted, and I suspect we will have done by then. And secondly, I would like a report on the improvement of the Youth Offending Service to the committee in July 2021 also. This obviously can be added to the forward plan, but I think in view of the audit and the questions that we've had during the scrutiny, it is something that I think that we would like to be appraised of. So can I confirm that you're content with those recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Agreed.
So we
Yes,
now
agreed.
move to item 9, which is the Tracker and Forward Work Programme. I'm sure that you've all had a good look at this. Are you content that we agree? And does any member have any comment on it or have any additions? Mary.
I think I mentioned earlier, Chairman, that given the discussions in full council, you might like to add something about scrutinising progress on work with disadvantaged children to your forward plan, but I don't have any suggestions about when exactly. I just thought that it might be something to bear in mind because there was a key interest in it. Thank you.
Yes, okay, thank you for reminding me of that, Mary. Sometimes my head forgets all of these in the throes of this managing this committee. Right, so that's that off. So can we therefore agree the recommendation and the tracker?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed.
Yes, agreed.
Agreed. Mary, I'll lower your hand for you. Oh, has it gone up again?
No, I tried to lower it as well. Thank you.
Probably when I was also doing it. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you. We've had a 3-hour meeting, which is longer than normal, but these things always, I think, take longer in a virtual meeting. So can I wish you all a very, very happy Christmas, have a peaceful one, and I look forward to working with you all in 2021. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
And same to all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy Christmas, everyone.
Christmas. Thank you, Chair. Season
take care. Let's get the virus. Let's get the vaccine, I mean.
Virus done.